Hi, everyone. Welcome. To my left, your right, my partner in crime, Joe Anthony from Planets Within. And all of this amazing technology is Joe's, and we've gotten it down to almost the science. We got here 1/2 hour, the whole thing gets set up. We were at like 45, 50 minutes. Yeah, so we're getting better. A little bit of housekeeping before we start. If you haven't done it yet, and you'd like to be on our monthly mailing list for these SEDONA Close Encounter monthly meetings, we've got 2 clipboards and a table in back with a pen. So if you'd like to sign up, we'd love to be able to stay in touch with all of you guys. Let's see. The 2018 Great Awakening Conference, which is going to take place here in Sedona, here Friday, and then Saturday and Sunday at the Creative Life Center, September the 28th through the 30th, when he's holding the flyer. If you'd like to learn more about it, it's at my Transformational Shift Events website, and you can purchase tickets there. By the way, just as a reference point, the speakers for that conference include Dr. Lynn Katai of the Phoenix Lights event, our own Tom Dongo, Michael Horn, who's the North American media representative for Billy Meyer, Clifford Mahudi, who's a Zuni elder, Sonia Barrett, our own MsM, who are in the back of the room, Shakara Tosha, and just recently this week we added the QHHT practitioner Allison Coe. Yeah, and she's not only interested, she's excited to come. She said she was having some communication with some people recently, and they said, you were about to go global. Any and all reasonable invitations that you get for special events or conferences, you should take them. And she happens to be speaking at ours first, so it's all good. I'm excited for that. That's it. Because this event is not about Joe and I, it's about M and MsM of Deep Disclosure. Welcome. Okay, for the lady.
I'll take the short one. Oh, we're going to move the stands.
Thank you.
Hi, guys.
Greetings. Nice to see everyone. Some new faces. So glad to be here.
Yeah.
How many people have listened to our show? So probably most of you, quite a few, yeah? Well, you know, what we were going to do tonight is fly by the seat of our pants, because we're really good at it. No, just kidding. Because we could do some question and answer as much as we can tell some of our bizarre stories, which by now most of you...
You've heard a lot of them, I guess, listening to the show. So, yeah, since this is a UFO evening, we're going to talk about our experience with aliens and throughout our lifetime, and then talk a little bit about what we're up to now and what those experiences brought us to. So, and then, you know, we're open to questions about those experiences or our current work. So, all right, awesome. I guess I'll start.
I like to say ladies first.
Okay. So my first encounters with non-humans, we'll call them non-humans because they're the first encounters I had were with inner earth beings. So when I was 3 years old, my mother moved our family to Mount Shasta, and my sister and I kept wandering off into the woods and disappearing for hours at a time. And I came to understand later that we were out there communicating with the Lemurian beings that lived underneath the surface of Shasta. And so a couple years later, when I was living in the Central Valley, I was taken up on a ship for the first time. I didn't remember this experience until much later in life because it was just something that I think I suppressed because it was scary. I had never been afraid of the dark when I was a child, but my Mexican twin was, and I call her my Mexican twin because we were born in the same year, and we're Mexican, not Irish. So, I actually grew up as a twin, and our rooms were right next to each other, and she was always afraid of the dark, and I was not, and she would beg me to sleep in my bedroom, and I would say no, and so I would like compromise with her, and we would sleep, our doors are right next to each other, we'd sleep by the doors, holding hands, because I guess I was a little bit stubborn, but all of a sudden I was afraid of the dark after the age of 5, and I had memories throughout my childhood about the event that took place, but they were just kind of fractured memories. I remembered waking up in the middle of the night and hearing loud noises outside of our bedroom, and there was a huge wind, and the window was open, and the blinds were smacking against the window, and there were lights coming through. And then I woke up the next morning with a bloody nose. And then this happened a few times, where I would, the lights would come, the wind, and I would wake up the next day with a bloody nose. And it wasn't until I was, I would say, about 28 years old. I had been working with a medium in Campbell, California, which is where I've spent a majority of my life. I met him when my father was dying of cancer. A client of mine referred me to him. I had never had a valid experience with a psychic before this, and I had always believed in magic, and I had always had like strange occurrences happen throughout my life, but I'd never had a really valid experience that with a psychic, aside from one of the Romany fortune tellers that have the little shops all up and down El Camino. And so I was really excited to meet him, and because I felt it would really help me with my grief and letting go of my father. So I met him about a month before my 28th birthday, actually. And at that time, he told me that I could do what he could do, and that's what I would end up doing in the future. And I didn't believe him, of course, because even though I wanted to have superpowers, I just didn't think that I did. And so it took him a long time to convince me, but over the course of the year, I started hanging out with him more and more, and and every time I was exposed to his frequency, some more of my gifts would present themselves. And so it was in our second reading that I had with him, because I only did one a year. Even though I hung out with him throughout the year. So in the second reading that I had, he did some energy work on me. So the guides were telling him to clear something out that was in my nose. And funny enough, I had been feeling something in here, and it kept making a noise like a kazoo. And so I was convinced I had a deviated septum, so I kept going to my doctor and making him look at my nose. And he's like, "No, your nose is fine, there's nothing wrong with your nose." So I'm I'm with Michael, and he's the medium. His name is Michael Alameda. And I'm I'm laying on the floor where he has me lay down to do this clearing, and he puts his hands over my nose, and he's like, "Have you ever had a surgery before?" And I'm like, "No, I've never had surgery in my life." And so he's like, "Oh, okay." And so he does this energy work, and then we go on, and we're talking, and he's like, "Okay, I have to tell you, I've only seen this twice, and I've done about 1,000 readings, but you've been abducted." And I was like, I was like, oh, really? I hadn't spent a lot of my life thinking about aliens. It was like, I looked up at the sky and I was like, well, there's clearly stuff out there. There's no way that we're the only people in the whole universe. There's got to be something out there. And I just accepted that, and I didn't really spend a lot of time thinking about them or fearing them or anything. But my sister had this like unrealistic fear over it, and so she wouldn't even allow me to talk about it around her anyways. And so when he told me about the abduction, that's when the memories of my childhood started coming back, and I was like, oh my God, like those were real. And I was actually taken up on a ship. And so another interesting part of that was that my best friend growing up was a Muslim girl named Aisha, and her mom, Bonnie, was my second mother, and she's a very like devout Muslim woman. She wore hijab and dressed very modestly, and she was a very conservative woman. But one day she told me that she was driving through our neighborhood with her son Muhammad and saw a large ship come down and just kind of like post over our houses. And it was at that point when I started to remember the abduction that I realized that those ships were coming for me and my sister. And so when they took me when I was a young girl, it was to put an implant in my nose so that they could track me, because they have these devices on ships where they can see us. Like, we kind of light up on a screen. And when you are a gifted individual, you have a larger spot on the screen. And in order to veil me, they did something that would cover me up, so that the people on the less benevolent ships wouldn't be able to see me on the ground. But they wanted to know where I was. So they were good ETs that took me, and they put this this tracking device in my nose so that I could so that they could keep tabs on me and know where I was when they couldn't see me on the screen. And so they had done a lot of testing. I went into this is the only other time I've been on a ship where I didn't go into the bridge or into the ready room, which is where I usually meet with the galactic beings and I go up. This was when I was put into it was like a circular room with doors on either side, and the chair in the center looked kind of like a dentist chair that you would get like kind of set up in. They wouldn't strap you down because something that they did to you was like just kind of like paralyzed you because you wouldn't move, and they were just doing like exams and these procedures, but it wasn't like I don't think it was anything very invasive, nor did it give me like cause for concern, except for the fact that as a child it was kind of scary going through these experiences. And so that was my first encounter, or my second, I guess, was when I was taken at the age of 5. But then when I was about 28 or 29 years old, which I've shared on the show, is when the Lemurian beings arrived in my bedroom. And so do you want to? We'll take a break and you can share a story if you want.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Thanks. I'm just getting bored standing over here. I've heard it all before.
He's got some good stories.
Well, I too was picked up when I was younger and didn't have a lot of recall. In fact, my first bit of recall came when I really went up. I was very conscious. I called them down and they parked a little shuttlecraft in the backyard, and I got on it and went up. And there's a lot of detail to the story, but to wrap it around to when I was younger, the pressure in my head and the high-pitched ringing was really intense. And I remember thinking while it was happening, oh, this is what happened to me when I was like 8, because it was the same pretty intense situation. But the way that all happened began with the ETs communicating to me in my head and telling me to go out and look up in the sky, and I would see a craft when I would do that. And that happened for a couple years before this one time they told me to go outside. Actually, they woke me up, and often they would, and tell me to go outside. But this had a little more specific instructions. And at the time I lived in Florida, they said, go down to the beach. I only lived about maybe 2 blocks from the beach, and meditate. So I did that, and I had my eyes shut for, I don't know, maybe 30 seconds, and the voice inside my head said, open your eyes. And probably from here to the second exit, sign down that hallway there, I'm not sure how far that is, maybe 50 yards, I guess, was a big ball of light, and it was casting like a moonlight reflection on the ocean, onto the wet sand. And I'm, kind of like touching the wet sand going, yeah, I'm awake. Okay, this is interesting. And my very next thought was, get me the hell out of here. Like, this is not what I signed up for. And at the time, I was in a pretty bad relationship. And so, I definitely was having enough at that point. And the moment my brain said that, that dot, or that ball turned into a dot, basically went zooming backwards at 1,000,000 miles an hour and became, like one of these ships that looked like Venus. And I was like, okay, I'll stay. And it came right back. And I'm like, okay, I'm listening, you have my attention. And it didn't say anything. And, this is odd because I do get communication in my head, so we're just looking at each other, as it were, and started walking down the beach. It's following me. I walked like for a mile, and it just kept getting smaller and going back further, because this was also getting to be like 5 in the morning, so I watched it until the sun came up. And then I had this idea, I'm going to go get in my car and get the hell out of this relationship and drive back to Minnesota. And that's exactly what I did. I didn't even say goodbye. I just took off. Because that was the message, get on with your life, And I went back to Minnesota, and it wasn't but a week later, and I moved to California, where this shuttle dropped down in the backyard. So,
Are you going to tell him what happened when you went on the
yeah.
ship? Okay.
Or which part? There's so many. Because that was only the first time. But that particular experience was pretty powerful because, well, when I first moved there to Sacramento, I moved around a lot with my computer job, and I would go into a bookstore, metaphysical bookstore, and find out what's going on. Like, who am I supposed to meet? I realize I'm here for doing computer stuff, but there's a bigger mission that I'm a part of. And so I met this lady, and she gave me a reading, and these ETs were saying, we talk to you all the time. And I was like, cool. And basically, I ended up moving into that lady's house because I just got to town, needed a place to live. She had a room for rent. And she basically said she was going up on the ships all the time. I'm like, well, I want to go up. And she goes, okay, well, here's what I do as a protocol. And she whipped out this angel board, like a Ouija board with a lot of pretty stuff on it for a positive sort of effect. And she's like, okay, just, put your hand on it. And we started asking a question, and I go, we spelt a couple, maybe one word. I'm like, this is going to take a while. I have a whole paragraph in my head. And she's like, well, that's what it was supposed to do. Just get you plugged in. And so I began to have a dialogue with this being who goes by the name of Jazz. And so I basically said, can I come up there? And she said, yeah. And, that was it. I got in bed, went to sleep, and there was somebody on my chest waking me up. And I opened up my eye, and of course it was dark, but I saw my reflection in this big black eye. And I closed my eyes down, and I'm like, oh. And I could hear her in my head. She's like, you know, don't worry, you asked, here I am. I'm like, okay. And she got off of me, you know, and was standing at the end of the bed. There was another one, and the way that these beings look, they look like grays, but they have faces. They have, you know, personalities, emotional bodies. They're not like the drone hive style, but they look like grays. And she's like, well, come on, let's go. You know, we're parked out back. The clock's running, you know. And so I'm like, wow. And then she goes, come on, let's go see Jesus. And I'm like, okay, let's do this. And so we go out and back, get into this little craft, and it ascends, and I'm watching the Earth get smaller. And we went on the mothership, and you know, there's quite a few interesting details, but I also suppressed some of them, surprisingly. Because the next night, there was a group channeling, and I got to communicate with Jazz, and I'm like, why did you suppress all that? And she's like, we didn't do that, you did that. It was pretty intense. You freaked out a little bit while you were up here. Yeah, probably like, I'm not going back. No way.
I always had this like question, you know, because they come and get you at night, and I don't know. I usually travel out of my body because it's just easier that way to make the trip. But like, you know, I don't wear a lot of pajamas. And I'm like, so when you come and get me, like, what am I wearing up there on the ship? Like, do you guys give me clothes when I get there? Because we have a friend who's gone up quite a bit too, and he started like, he said it was really cold up there, and so he was wearing like, you know, he would like prepare himself before he went. He would wear like long sleeve shirt and warm pants, and I'm like. I'm like, so what exactly am I wearing up there? Anyways, go on.
Oh, no, that's fine. Yeah, don't they give you some robes or something?
I don't know. Well, you know what? Last time I went up, one of the last times, actually, this was a couple months ago. I told you about this one, Patrice. I went up there, and this was like, such a strange experience. So, I got like sucked up, and then I like walked in across into this like drop down door, and when I got in there, there was like a bunch of beds, like little, you know, smaller than like twin beds, like old, like tiny little hospital beds, yeah. And on each one of the beds, there were like some clothing laid out, and some personal items, and a little. It was a little like pill bottle, but it was full of joints. And I know, this is crazy, right? So I'm like, yes! I was like, I knew they had free weed in heaven. And so I changed into this, into these, it was like a white, like, they were like white shorts and a tank top. And I was greeted by a woman. A bunch of other people started showing up onto the ship, going to the other beds, and I was greeted by this woman, and she looked like the Oracle from the Matrix. And she brought us into this other room, and there were like couches, and like there was like a kind of behind a glass there was like some greenery, some like plants and stuff, and she handed us all these books, these like really old-looking, thick like leather-bound books. And she had us smoke these joints. And I was like, okay, well, you know, if you insist. And so, so I opened up the book, and she's like, you guys, you need to, it had something to do with like getting in the right frequency for this process that they were gonna put us through. So I opened up the book, and inside the book is like my life. And each page that you open to, you kind of like drop into it, kind of like, you know, the pensive in Harry Potter. So it was kind of like that, but in a book. And like I went through all these life experiences where I had like conflicts with people, and like worked it out and had conversations with them. And and like got to see all the people that from my family that had crossed over, and
Oh, is that why we got along so well the next day?
oh yeah, I think so. I just had it was a releasing process. It was
Working through our
So-
conflicts.
so yeah. Yeah, it was a really intense experience, and then and I was kind of confused at the end. So we walked out, like, because it reminded me of what people talk about when they have like a life review when they cross over, and so I was kind of confused about it. And I come out of the room, and we go back to the bay where we walked in, and I'm like asking the woman, and I was I was like, you know, what am I doing here? You know, and she was like, well, what do you think? And I was like, well, I have 3 ideas of why I'm here. I was like, but I remember coming. I remember you bringing me up here, and I was conscious the whole time, so I don't think that I'm dead, but that was one of the possibilities. And then she just cut me off there. She said, yeah, okay, so since you're conscious and you're aware right now, you know that you're not dead. We're actually sending you back now. And so I left after that. So I was only up there for a few hours. And then they dropped me back down, which is really unpleasant. I don't know if any of you guys have done this, but they kind of just like drop you from the sky and like back into your body, and you just like bounce. Like
Yeah,
off your bed.
right out of the couch too.
Yeah.
The first time I did it, I bounced right onto the floor.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm like, boom, bounced right up. I'm like, can we work on that, guys? Can we work on like a better landing? Like, it's not. Yeah, it feels like you're getting vacuumed out of your body when they pull you up and then they like drop you back down. Like
So
a
yeah,
football.
when I went up physically, consciously,
Yeah.
you know, aware. But of course, I suppressed some things. So, but one thing that people might be wondering is, okay, well, who were those beings? Well, they were basically part of the Arcturian crew. These are the helper beings for the Arcturians. And so the next time that I had an encounter, because they actually asked me to go live in the middle of nowhere, so we could have more interaction. And so I did. I moved 90 miles outside of Sacramento, and I drove to work every day to do this little experiment. And so the first day that I lived there, of course, she told me, Jazz said, anytime you call, I'll come. And so I'm going to put that to the test. Day 1, practically, I'm there on the property, and it's nighttime, and I had somebody with me too, by the way. So they saw everything that I saw. But I'm calling them, you know, I love you, come on, let's see some stuff, you know? And I want to show this guy, you know? And so we hear footsteps while we're walking around in the woods, and I'm like, I don't know if that's them or what, you know? And then when we were headed back from this little walk, just talking to the stars and all, I see these flashing lights, green and yellow, behind these trees. I have a hitchback driveway coming down. And I'm like, there they are, they landed right here. And now I lived in the middle of nowhere. There was no lights anywhere. So this was clearly, you know, something to inspect. And so we ran up there, hitchback 1, 2, no sign of nothing. Like, okay, now they're just messing with us? What's the
Late night run.
Well, you know, I told you I love you. Come on now. And we're walking back down the hitchbacks, and right by, I was in this little trailer, you know, off-grid trailer with solar and everything, and there was a being standing by my front door, leaning up against the tree. And it was an Arcturian, about a 5-foot Arcturian, you know, white skin with a blue iridescent sheen. And we stopped dead in our tracks. He's like, do you see that? I'm like, oh yeah. He's like, what do we do? I'm like, let's just sit down right here and, you know, look at it and try to communicate with it. You know, meanwhile, it's in our head knowing exactly what we're saying and doing, of course. I mean, I should have known that, but that's not what's going through your head at the time, of course. You're like, oh my freaking God, you know? And so we just sat there for like 10 minutes, you know? I'm trying to have a communication, again, nothing. And so I basically was like, okay, well, let's go to bed, you know? They're probably gonna bring us up tonight, and you know, as soon as we get horizontal, they'll do it. And so we went to walk in the house, and I thought I was being real cool and real coy, and I slipped right down the side of the house. I didn't go in the door, I went down, and I walked along. I was gonna get a different angle and see this guy from another side. Well, little announced to me, he knew exactly what I was doing, and ended up walking down too, and when I rounded the corner, he was there. And I was like, with everything I could muster, "Who are you?" And it came right in my third eye, Octavar. I'm like, "Nice to meet you. I'm going to bed." And I went in and laid down, and he was poking his head like we did. We had sleeping mats, you know, bags on these mats, and he's poking his head, looking in the window. And then I was like to my friend, "Do you see that?" He's like, "Yeah." I go, "Well, I guess we should go to sleep because we're going up." He's like, "Sleep? I can't sleep." And so I went to sleep. I have an ability to just turn everything off and be gone in like a moment's notice. And so he was waking me up. He's like, you know, pointing behind us. And in the kitchen, there was Venetian blinds. And you could see that he was standing like 2 inches from it because like this blue iridescent shine is coming through the Venetian blinds. And I'm like, "Yeah, they're gonna get us." That's the plan, go to sleep. And well, I went up and had some Ascension grid work tune-up stuff, as they called it, and I'm not sure if he went up or not. He didn't remember. And anyway, so back to MsM.
So like I said before, they watch us on screens, right? And the first time that I met Jazz, it was again like she kind of she likes to wake you up in the middle of the night and just kind of hover over you. So I wake up and I open my eyes and there's this, you know, alien hovering over my bed, and I always have stuff like this in my hair. Like I'm always wearing like a bow or a flower or a headband or something. And that night when Jazz came to see me, she had this big like pink bow like attached to her head, and she's like, like. And so I was like, I like realized like we're like a reality show to them, and I'm like her favorite character. Like they're watching us do all this stuff. So. I guess I'll talk a little bit now about what happened after the Lumerians showed up. So when I got activated, I finally like fully came online. So I had been hanging out with this medium, and he's still to this day like the most powerful medium I've ever met. So after spending all this time with him, I finally came online, and he told me, you know, this is going to happen, and when it happens, you're going to think that you've lost your mind, but you haven't, and I'm going to help you. So call me. And so I'm like, okay, this is never going to happen, but okay. And so it did. It happened. So it started with like just a lot of voices in my head. And so I had voices in my head growing up, but I just thought I had like a really eccentric inner monologue, like that did, you know, accents and, you know, different dialects, and even though I can't do them with my regular speaking voice. But then they started coming in different languages, and I'm like, wait a second, like I definitely don't speak Italian, so what the heck, you know? And so that's when it started happening. And then I would be laying down in my bed at night, you know, in an empty room, and it would sound like I was in the middle of a crowded restaurant. I could hear like 100 conversations going on all around me, and I could smell things that weren't there, and I started feeling everything. Now, at the time, I was working as like a hairdresser in the Bay Area. I worked in this really old Victorian building downtown Campbell. And so I was, you know, physically touching people all day long, and I'm like working on their meridian lines, and of course every time I touch them, their, you know, spiritual entourage like just comes in to deliver their messages. And so I'm getting very distracted, and I'm like on this emotional roller coaster. I remember one day I was walking through the parking lot, and I take a step and I start having tears coming down my eyes, and I take a few more steps and I'm laughing, and I'm like, okay, I am 29 years old and I've officially lost my mind. Like, this is it. This is when it happened to Megan. This is when Megan went crazy. And so I remembered what Michael had told me. And so I said, okay, well, I'll give him a call, because either I'm crazy and I need some serious mental help, or this guy really can help me. And if he can, then I'm not labeled a crazy person for the rest of my life, and that seems like a better option. So so I called him up, and he was like, I told you so, of course. And I'm like, okay, you told me. And I'm like, what do I do? You know, I need help. I can't function. I'm at work. I'm crying. I'm laughing. Like, I can't do this. And so he said, you need to get some crystals. So I went down the street and got some crystals. And he's like, you need to meditate. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to meditate, right? So I left work early that day, and I decided I was going to try and meditate for the first time. Now, I had been meditating my whole life. I just didn't realize what it was. I thought I was just really spacey. It's like, so, because I grew up in a really loud house with 8 brothers and sisters, a big, loud Mexican family, and like I would just find my quiet space within. And so I guess had been meditating my whole life, but I just didn't realize it. And so I laid down in my bed, and I was like, okay, I'm going to meditate. And I didn't know what the heck I was doing. So I just like put my hands out to the side. I was like, this feels right. And I'm like, okay, here we go. And all of a sudden, this like bright light shines out of my right eye, and then out of my left eye, and then it comes out of the like center of my forehead, and it's like boom, and my head's like pinned back. And then I'm looking around, and I see I'm in my backyard. I had like left my body. So the first time I tried to meditate, I left my body, and I'm floating around in my backyard, and I freak out because I didn't intend to do this. So I'm like, and I fall back in, and I'm like, okay, I'm not going to do that again unsupervised. Like, I'm going to wait until I can see this guy, and he's going to help me, because I don't know what the heck is going on with me. But that night, I went to sleep, and it was one of those nights that you have like, where you like wake up into a dream, and then wake up into a dream, and wake up into a dream. And so on the
Be
third,
prepared when that happens.
Yeah.
That's how it happened to me, too.
Yeah.
That started everything.
yeah, the third time that it happened, I woke up, and I was, my whole room was illuminated like the sun. It was like bright, but it was about 3 in the morning, so it shouldn't have been that light. And I could feel the warmth of the light on my skin. And I was kind of like trying to adjust my eyes. I was very confused. I couldn't tell if I was awake or asleep, but when I closed my eyes, I would be laying like on a beach, and when I opened them, I was in my bedroom. So I knew I was awake. And so finally the lights adjust, and it goes dark. And I look over to the right, and standing by my door are 3 beings. I call them beings because I knew they weren't human, even though they looked human. They were humanoid beings. There was a woman with long, like silvery hair, and 2 men who were very tall, standing behind her. They never spoke the entire time, even when they took me. So I don't know if they were her bodyguards, or I don't know. I don't know exactly who these men were. And she looked at me, and she communicated telepathically, and she motioned like this, and she said, come with us. And so at her, behest, I floated up out of my body, which apparently that's why they showed up, was they knew I could leave my body now. It would be easier for me to travel. And this is how they take a lot of people, just because the up and down and the traveling at night is much easier on our physical forms when we leave the body behind. And so I started following them out of my house, and I noticed that in my light body, my hands were like little solar discs. There was light coming out of them, and so I was turning on the lights in my house with them. Like, I was floating by the lights and turning them on. And so this was this was so incredible to me that I kind of like disregarded the fact that I'm following 3 strange beings out of my house. And so we get to my backyard, and there's a shuttle in the backyard. And the shuttle looks kind of like, it's shaped kind of like a train car, but it's like for 4 people. And it's not attached to anything. And so we get into this shuttle, and we zoom up the coast and go down under the ground. And they took me into the city of Telos. And so I went into this underground cavern. Now, the cavern was probably about the size of like this place all the way back to like where the hallway is back there. So it was this big empty cavern. There's nothing in it except for some like, wall sconces with like flames in them. And then and there's a stone slab table. And the 3 of them sit behind this like stone slab, and she begins to tell me everything that I'm going to do over the next few years. And why, this is like, and I kind of suppressed this, honestly. I remembered everything up till going out of my house and to like getting into the shuttle. And then the part when they took me underground and told me everything that I was going to do, I kind of blocked from my mind because I was not compliant. They were telling me, because the stuff that they were telling me was pretty outrageous. And they were telling me that, again, I was working as a hairdresser. I had built quite a large clientele. I was working on like tech executives in the Bay Area. So like the president of iTunes was one of my clients. And I was working for a product line, and I was doing hair on stage. And I had spent like a decade building my business. And they're telling me, okay, you're going to quit all of that. You're gonna pack up all
Run
your
off
stuff.
with a weird guy.
Yeah, you're gonna pack up all your stuff. You're gonna run off with a stranger. You can't tell anybody where you're going. When you try to explain it to them, they're gonna think you're crazy. And so you're just gonna stop trying. And we need you to do this because you're gonna help save the world. And I'm like, no way, man. Like. I'm not going to do this. Like, my family is going to think I'm crazy. I've had friends for like, 20 years, like decades, that I'm just going to disappear on. I'm going to miss out on their babies and their weddings, and I'm just going to be gone. And I'm not going to do that. Like, I was a very like grounded and reliable person. I was like the rock for my family, and I was just gonna they were just gonna watch me face plant at life for a few years and think I was crazy, and I wasn't gonna be able to do anything to change their minds. And so for a long time, I said no to this mission. So over the next year, they kept taking me and telling me, okay, this is what we need you to do. And so she's like, okay, you are going to do this, because this is what you were born to do, and we need you to remember who you are. Like, we need you to start remembering. So they sent me on a journey to remember who I was, and I basically cracked my own Da Vinci Code. So they were guiding me through my head. I worked with multiple psychics. I even worked with Dr. Walter Semkiw, who wrote a book on reincarnation. He's the reincarnation of John Adams. And he's been working with Kevin Ryerson, who I also got introduced to, who was a personal psychic for Shirley MacLaine. And together with my guides and these other amazing psychics, I remembered 3 of my past lives. And while I was doing research on them, I found a book with 3 of them on the cover. They were depicted on the cover. So through my research, I learned their symbols and their hidden messages. And that book was written by this gentleman here. So that is actually how we met. So I bought the book, and I started reading it, and I'm like, oh my God, this is my life. And there were a lot of numbers involved with this whole thing that correlated to something that we built in a past life in Egypt, and my birthday, which was found inside the Great Pyramid, written on walls in a sealed chamber, like all the way around, that I discovered from Robert Bivall, who was there when they unlocked the chamber. And it was completely sealed, and so they had really thick walls, and they drilled a hole in the wall and stuck a camera in to see what was in there before they opened it. And they found that the chamber was completely empty, except for on the walls was a series of numbers written over and over and over again, and that they were my birthday in this life. And so it was this crazy journey that I went on of like self-discovery. And finally, I was, once I had connected all the dots and connected to him, I was sitting on my couch one day, and this very strong voice came into my head. And it was very precise, and it just said to me, 3 weeks, 4 days, 10 hours, 52 minutes, 22 seconds, it begins. And I'm like, what? Like, what begins? What are you talking about? This is like, I've never heard anything so clear or so precise. But it was at that exact moment that something happened that shifted my financial situation, that allowed me to quit my life and put all my stuff in storage and go on the road with this guy. And he can tell you a little bit about what we've been up to.
Okay, but before we do that,
Okay.
I want to go back to a little bit of what else happened. Now, mind you, I was like 29, and as some of you know, I just turned 55 a couple days ago. So quite a long time ago, I had all these ET encounters, and also when I met the cosmic scientist. This is a very interesting story, that he was so strange. It must have been like meeting me, you know, at the time. The things he was telling me, you know, like Jesus didn't die on the cross. You know, they got him down, and he went over to India and lived till he was 90, and a whole litany of things. I'm just like, what? Okay, you know. And he was telling the host that introduced us that she could get a job in the Pleiades. So when she went to sleep at night, she would be a teacher at their university. And she's like, I'd like to take that job. And so can we go there tonight? And I'm just listening to all this, right? I was actually 25 at the time that this occurred. And, you know, even though I started to wake up when I was 19, this was still very strange to me. And so we slept there, and we had been discussing my interest in virtual reality. Like, wouldn't it be great to have games that taught people about mystery schools and stuff like that? And so, you know, that was one of the reasons why I was being introduced to this guy, because he was a cosmic scientist. Little did I know, he was many other things. And so I went to sleep, and I'm having this amazing dream, and it was about virtual reality, and I was in this game where it was like the Knights of the Round Table, and it was very emotional. You know, I definitely was blown away by the entire experience, and I'm laying there in the morning thinking about it, like, wow. And she popped her head in the room and said, well, we went to the Pleiades last night, and you came along too. They had you in a room in a special chair. They put a VR headset on you, and you were checking out their system. And I was like, you know, my jaw dropping down, you know, to the pillow, like, oh, what? That's exactly what happened. And so another interesting thing about the story, when I lived in the middle of nowhere, like the couple days after this, you know, Octavar showed up on the ground there, and I was with a person at the time also, and we were driving, I think it was on a weekend, because we were headed into town. And that morning I said, okay, I'd like to see a craft in broad daylight. And so, didn't get any like, okay, sure. But sure enough, I'm driving down the road, and one flies right out in front of me, like 2 car lengths ahead, and then flies out into the field. And I didn't go, do you see that? I'm just like stunned, you know? And I'm watching it, and it's flying right alongside the car. And then this field comes to an end, like there's some trees, and it flashes like interdimensional. You know, it doesn't zoom up or anything, it just flashes and disappears. And so I thought that was pretty cool. You know, so, okay, what can I ask for next? So I used to take groups out and say, okay, we're going to have a flyby. And sure enough, Jazz and Sayaj, as the other guy, they would give us a little light show. But one day I went to do that with some folks and got egg on my face because the message was it's too dangerous and we're not going to be doing that anymore. And that was like around the time when some of that video footage got released where you could see, you know, like a missile coming out of, you know, Earth's atmosphere at a flying object that very quickly turned. I don't know if any of you have ever seen that. So, you know, I'm like, okay, I understand. Now I'll turn it back to you while I think about what I'm going to share next.
Oh, okay. Well, you're going to talk about Rendell and the...
Oh, that's pretty deep. That's going way down the rabbit hole.
Well,
Like, what part of him?
well, I don't know. You just started talking about
Okay. Well, the cosmic scientist was a very interesting gentleman because he, while we both shared many things with each other, he was from the future. His soul was from the future, and he said he was on a go-back mission. You know, and basically we've hinted at this in the shows, deep disclosure shows, that, you know, we've been in a time loop. We've tried to optimize these gates and awaken as many people as possible before, 7 times before. This is the 7th and final time that it's being tried. And so, you know, he shared many interesting things, including about who he was, also on a higher level, because every time he went to sleep, he was all over the place. And many times we spent together over a decade traveling and stuff, and so I would be waiting for him to wake up, like, what did you do last night, you know? And so he became the head director of this hollowed out asteroid, where it's like a base that all these ships come and park, and then there's conference rooms, and he would tell me he, you know, had a meeting with Saint Germain, and he told me to tell you that you got some big roles ahead, you know. So my whole life has been filled with, you know, nudges from spirit about big roles ahead.
Yeah. So it was when, you know, our knowledge from Rendell explained why my birthday was written inside the pyramid, and it was the fact that we had done this, you know,
We
6
traveled
times
back.
before.
Yeah, he actually said to me, if you don't get it right this time, you're going to go back to Egypt in 3103 BC and do it all over again. I'm like, what? I have to live how long to get what right?
So yeah, we've all done this together so many times, and we got, you know, we wised up after a while and started leaving clues behind for ourselves so that we didn't have to start from scratch every time. And so we would hide things, including, you know, modern items in like sealed tombs, which Rendell shared with us. So we're gonna. Matthew and I shared an incarnation, and we were in the same body. That's why we're so comfortable together. And so this was, you know, a being that had the male-female soul weaved into it, so it had the balance. And he did some significant things back in Egypt. And when they opened his tomb, they didn't share this with the public. They found some odd items in there, and one of them was like an Apple computer and a modern cell phone and
Tablet and
a Windows logo and a picture of Matthew and myself in these bodies. And so
the way he sprung this on me was after 5 years of getting to know me. When I went to Egypt and I came back saying, I know who I am, I remember, he goes, okay, I think I can tell you now, and I've been making sure that you're, you know, on the right track before I tell you. And he basically told me this story, you know, and he referenced it like, remember when you first met me and my face like turned white as a sheet and my eyes bugged out and jaw dropped open? I'm like, yeah, I remember. Because I'd seen this picture of you that they found in this sealed tomb. And so I was a little shocked, but the other guides that he worked with said that he would be meeting me. So he also, said that they used my dad's computer system in the artificial intelligence system that they were building back in the 80s. And he, was a really genius guy that at the age of 17, he cracked some kind of math code and got a knock on the door from some people that were in what's called a white budget project versus black, and they were like, come with us, we would like you to work with us on these projects. And so when we would travel across the country and do these various things, a couple times he's like, well, there's a base right here, and tonight I'll be down there working on some stuff. I'm like, can I come? No. Okay.
So yeah.
Yeah.
So Rendell is a really interesting guy, and he's since crossed over. However, he came through to me a couple years ago. I started. So I'm a scribe, right? So this is how I get the information from the galactics that I work with now, and so I was doing a lot of work at the time, and I started scribing, these very complicated mathematical formulations, and I to put that in perspective, like I think I finished like algebra or geometry, like I started algebra 2, so that's as far as I got in math. In college, I never finished my math courses, and so I'm writing these down, and I'm like drawing these charts and these like symbols that I don't recognize from here, and so I start showing it to Matthew, and I'm like, okay, so he recognized the formulations, and it was Rendell's work, and it was something that he had created while he was here called metavariants, and it was a mixture of like 3 different Earth mathematics and an off-planet math. And it had to do with, so he was having me draw these like, the nautilus, and cut it into like pie shapes, and so each one of these formulas represented a little piece of the pie there, and so when you have all of them together, you can create matter out of nothing. And so that's when that started coming through, we had made contact again with Rendell on the other side. And so that was an interesting aspect of that. I lost my train of thought. There's a lot in this room tonight.
Yeah?
Yeah. Okay.
I call him the cosmic scientist, but yes, his name was Rendell.
I was going somewhere with that, but
Okay.
keep going. I'll remember.
It'll come back.
I'll remember.
He also told me very interestingly that he was what was called a Spatian. It's a type of race that was created in the very beginning, and he was an android. And his job was to travel space and explore and, report back. And basically, I don't know if he got lost and kept going or whatever ended up happening, but his story is that he became sentient. And, all this time ago, he said that the karmic board was going to take his Akashic history and that he wasn't going to be able to ascend. And he was a little miffed about that. He gathered all this experience and, was working on being a great guy, and it was just going to be ripped out from underneath him. So he demanded a hearing in front of this karmic board and was chewing their asses out pretty much. Like, who the hell do you guys think you are, sitting up there for 1 billion years? How come you don't have an election, and calling yourself Lord? What is with that? What's so interesting about this story, because here's the punchline, I was going to a channeling, and it was Lord Michael. And people would be like, hey, Lord Michael, what's up? And so the next night, after he tells me this story, somebody's like, say, Lord Michael, and he goes, don't call me Lord, just call me Michael. So, it's this kind of stuff where third-party confirmation happens to me all the time. Well, it used to, but now I have Megan, so.
Yeah. So this is where I was going to go with that. I remembered. I'm a total space cadet. So all of these things have happened for a reason. You know, all of these experiences that we've had and these interactions with these beings that we've had have happened for a reason. And that's what they were preparing me for when they took me underground. So including our interaction with Renda, who came here to meet Matthew from the future, to give us information about our past and where we're headed as a society. And so, you know, so what the inner earth beings were telling me was true. You know, I had to find these people and start working with them. And I became basically the oracle for a faction of the Earth Alliance that is working on a global reset that Matthew has been doing for quite some time in the banking world and various levels. And so we learned all of this stuff because of what we were supposed to do. And so after we connected, the Lemurians had us doing some grid work and meeting people. So they sent us all over from Washington all the way down to Southern California and across the United States down into South Florida, where we met up with other parts of our team that had been pulled into the same mission. And we've been working with them very closely ever since. And at that time, you know, they were up on a ship and pulling us up because it had become unsafe under the surface because of things that the Cabal was doing, trying to create the big one in California, and they had like nukes all across the fault line where they're trying to set it off. And so they were bringing us up at that time, and then they sent us back to California via Colorado, so we had to go all the way up and then back down. We spent about 6 months living on the edge of the desert in Desert Hot Springs, where there was a negative ET base and military base down there where they were testing out some new things, and so they had us there on the grid, keeping things in line. And then you know, during that period is when I really got into a stronger communication with the galactic beings, which we refer to on Deep Disclosure as the High Council, because there are a lot of different galactic councils, because the Federation is huge. But this is made up of the Ascended Masters, and so you may know these. They're familiar looking people to you. You would know like Jesus and Saint Germain and I always have trouble with El Moira. Yeah, you knew what I was saying. Yeah, I have trouble saying it's a mouthful. L. Yeah.
By the way,
So-
he's the one that always spoke to me in my head for most of my life until he was like, well, you're the master now, so I'm not going to say anything. And I haven't heard a peep out of him, but
Yeah.
she talks to him.
He's a funny guy. He's like, he has a different relationship with a lot of people, so he's kind of stern with me. And every time I see him, it's like I feel like I'm like putting him out so much to have to interact with me. But he's just kind of more serious, and he thinks that I'm not serious enough. I am not taking this serious enough. And so, but they all have different kind of personalities, and so it was actually one of the. I knew that I would eventually end up here in Sedona because around the time they gave me the countdown is when they showed me a rock formation, and they told me that I was going to come to this place and build this healing center. And they showed me these healing baths, and that there was water that was going to come up from under the earth, and there was this ancient aquifer. They called it I don't know. I can't remember what they call it right now. But they said it had been untouched by humans for a long time, and it was super healing. And they showed me these pyramids, and they said, okay, we need you to go and build this thing. And I'm like, how am I going to do this? Like, I'm like, that looks like the desert. Where am I going to get water in the middle of the desert to build this like fancy bathhouse? Like, are you guys crazy? But I knew that eventually I would end up here in Sedona because of the rock formation that they showed me, which I found out from Matthew was Cathedral Rock. And so when we were in Desert Hot Springs, I was having a chat with Sai Baba, and he showed me like pyramids coming out of the red dirt and an obelisk rising up, and he said, "You're headed east now, and you won't make it past the Red Desert this time." And so we were on our way to Tulsa, of all places. We were going to go do a project out there, and we ended up here in Sedona, and that was about a year and a half ago, and we or a year and 9 months ago, and we never left. We just got we just stuck.
Pretty much, yeah.
We couldn't leave the area, so we were like, okay, we're here, we're home. And that was around the time that the Lumerians moved into Thunder Mountain. And so they had shared later, like, okay, we've moved here now, and this is where we're coming in and out of the earth, and this is where we want you. And this is also going to be like the first city of light, and we need you here to to help anchor that in. And so, what were you going to say?
Oh, well, I was going to say a little bit about one of my experiences with El Moria.
Okay.
You know, I was probably about 26 years old, and it was one of these dreams where you know that it's too vivid and lucid, and, you know, that it's not a dream. And so in the dream, I was in a silver room sitting on a silver bench, and he was like pacing back and forth in front of me, and would stop periodically and bend over and look in my eyes with his big blue eyes, you know, and his white turban, and he's like, "Are you going to do it?" And I'm like, you know, he must have told me a little bit about, like, okay, well, you're pretty much going to do nothing, let's just say, for like 30 years, because your job is at a specific time. So you're going to hang out for 30 years and then do this role. Okay, will you do it? And I'm like, okay, because obviously I had previously agreed, you know, before I got here.
So that's a strange thing too. Like, you come in with this contract of what you're going to do, but you have to like re-agree to it when you're here, and that's why they were like pressuring me so hard when I kept being, you know, defiant of the plan. Like, they were like, "No, this is what you were born for. This is what you're going to do. Like, this is what you're doing here. You're not on a vacation. Like,
Indeed, yeah.
You're not here to save the world one highlight at a time. You gotta go."
So yeah, I mean, there's so many aspects to the story.
So,
Go ahead.
Sound like you were pausing.
I did pause.
So Sai Baba said to me in that channeling as well, in that little chat. I like to call it a chat because I'm not like, they don't like come through me like a channel would. They just kind of are talking to me. And but he said something very profound, and I think it's so like relevant to the time that we're in now, and relevant to the information that we learned from Rendell about the 7 transdimensional realities. But he said, "When we are one, then we are done." And so that's kind of become our mantra on this journey.
And obviously that means the collapse into the timelines, and so we are in one unity timeline now. You know, the Mandela effect, a lot of people speculate, but it's all those different things that we're seeing, like in the Bible, the one that blows my mind, right, where it says, well, I grew up, how many hands grew up where it's like the lion shall lay with the lamb? Remember that? Well, that's not what it says in the Bible now, if you go pick one up. In Isaiah 11:6, it says, the wolf will dwell with the calf. Oh, yeah. And so I asked the Galactics, what's that all about, you know? And basically they said, well, that is exactly the way it is in one of the timelines that you've been merged with. So it just, you know.
Yeah, these timelines, as we pass certain threshold, like benchmarks on the path, and we get things right, the timelines collapse back into each other. And so the other alternate realities are eliminated. And I think it's kind of interesting because, you know, there's the Wingmaker material that talks about the 2 future timelines. And, you know, when they came back before the conversation that I had with Baba, and so he was explaining to me at that time as well that we were going to take another year take another lap around the sun in order to braid the two remaining timelines into one, because we had made it farther than we had ever made it before, and we wanted to eliminate the AI future, because not because it went off the rails or it was really a negative future, but because it wasn't an optimum future for humanity.
Well,
It was kind of like
humanity didn't gain
Yeah.
its realization. It
Yeah.
didn't become enlightened.
It was kind of like The Giver. Have you ever seen that movie? Where it's like all black and white, and everybody loses their individuality and creativity and the things that make us human, that come from our hearts. And so they just thought it would be better for all of us if we ended up in the same timeline with the balance between the heart and the mind, and two becoming one. So we did at that time. We decided to do that, and so these timelines have been collapsing, and the other great news about that is that as a society we have reached the level of consciousness that we need to tip the scales. So that doesn't mean that everybody on this planet is awake, and we all know that, right? But there are enough of us seeding the consciousness grid that we can move forward into a better reality for all of us, and that's also really exciting. And so, do you want to tell them a little bit about your background or what we're working on now?
Yeah, I want to tell another story though too about Rendell.
Are we okay with time?
It's 8:10, and we're going to start wrapping up in 10 minutes.
Okay.
Quarter minutes, 10 minutes to 9.
Okay, cool. Okay.
Okay.
Rendell, you're going to tell another story. I messed you up.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
that's okay. Well, there's so many, so many stories. Now I'm not sure which one I was going to say. So why don't we move to what you were going to suggest?
Well, I was going to talk about, so aside from the aliens interfering in our lives, we've had humans that have come into our lives, or people who appeared to be humans, come into our lives and kind of set us down a path to make sure that it's I don't know if you guys have seen the Adjustment Bureau.
In fact, I just remember what I was going to say. Okay. So hold that thought, because Rendell was also a consultant to things like Star Trek and Hollywood, and was, causing stuff to be released. For example, the TV show Fringe, once you get past the first season, they go to another dimensional reality and meet themselves. And they're 10 years in the future, each dimensional reality, transdimensional reality, as Rendell called them. So the Adjustment Bureau, he also said that, the synchronicity engineers, which is why I thought of this, the Adjustment Bureau, same thing, have spent, thousands of hours of overtime making sure that everybody that was necessary to meet would meet.
Yeah.
To do this great...
taking me underground and then sending me on a wild goose chase to remember my past lives. And so, but there were other interventions that happened, and the first one that I remember clearly was when I was in college. I was 17 years old, and it was a Saturday. I was eating lunch at the dining commons, and it was totally empty because no one's there on the weekends. And so I'm sitting there by myself, and this guy comes up, and he walks up to my table, and he says, "You look like somebody that would have lunch with me." And I'm like, well, okay, sure, why not? Have a seat. And so we sit down, he sits down, he starts talking to me, and he tells me about how he has died and come back to life 3 times. So he fell from a 3rd-story balcony onto his head and died and came back to life. And then again at the hospital, when he was in surgery, he died and came back to life. And then a couple years later, he had spinal meningitis and died and came back to life, all to come back and find me. And so he was this really strange guy, and so we had this really interesting conversation, and then I got up and I walked away. We just, I was like, well, it was very nice to meet you. I think his name was Kevin. I'll see you around sometime. And so a couple days later, he shows up at my door. And I never told him where I lived. I didn't even give him my phone number. And so I don't know how he found me, but he shows up at my door and he hands me 3 books. And, the 3 books were Fight Club, by Chuck Palahniuk, and Do It, Scenarios of the Revolution by Jerry Rubin, which was one of the leaders of the Yippie Revolution that started in Berkeley. And the third one was a book called Days of War, Nights of Love, Crime Think for Beginners, an A to Z guide to the revolution. And it was like A is for anarchy, and B is for the bourgeois, and C is for corporations. Like, it just basically started like programming me. And so I had this like rebel spirit my whole life. I was one of those people that was born awake, and I knew I was here to change things. I just didn't know how I was going to do that. And so I was never a really compliant student. I just went to college because that's what you were supposed to do after high school, and so I went. And then he shows up and he gives me these books, and I start reading these, and I stop going to class, and I'm like, and I'm just reading whatever I come across, and I just become totally immersed in like the revolution. And so I read the 3 books, and I ended up moving across campus because my twin sister, who I went to college with, she didn't let me live with her at first. She wanted some space, but her roommate never showed up, and she begged me to move in with her. So, so I ended up moving in with her on the other side of campus, and it was about 3 weeks after I'd met that Kevin guy, and he shows up at my door again. And he's like, okay, you should be done by now. I'll take the books. And he sat down and talked to me for a couple minutes, and then I never saw him again. And then a few years, like many years later, when I was working as a hairdresser, I had a client who came, and I didn't find out until later how this person came to be, but she was a recruiter for the CIA. And her name was Dottie Creer, if that was really her name. She was awesome, though. She looked like Jane Fonda, and she was great, and I loved doing her hair. But I'm pretty sure that because of what I learned later, that she was there to check up on me and see where I was on the path, and if I was like waking up yet, or ready to start going to work, because they knew I was coming for a long time because they had seen me in the looking glass. And so they knew about my role with these individuals. And I learned later through work that I was doing with the GIA that I had been under like heavy government surveillance since about 2013.
GIA meaning what?
The Global Intelligence Agency. And so I was doing some like remote viewing and tracking like financial transactions and channeling for them. At the time, they were working with the Alliance, and so they did a background check on me, and they expected to find like some parking tickets and regular run-of-the-mill stuff, and they ended up discovering that I had like heavy surveillance on me all the way back to it was about 2012 when it started, and the guy that did the background check, he said, this is about the amount of surveillance you would see on somebody who's working with the president, like in the White House. So this is very strange that they're using this many resources for a hairdresser in Campbell. And so they had been inserting, people had been inserted in my life to see where I was and what I was up to. And so I had this other woman show up at my salon and give me 3 Doreen Virtue books to teach me about the Lumerians before they started coming to get me. And that was really strange. So, what you looked like you were going to share?
Can you dive a little bit into what you learned out of the Looking Glass experience?
Oh, okay.
I think it's a good story.
Yeah. So, do you want to talk about?
What we've learned about what it is, or what we...
This happens all the time. Oh, did I turn it off? Hello? Okay. This happens all the time when we record the show. I'm like, what were we talking about? So stop.
Here we are, uncut. Raw.
Some sense for what your Looking Glass experience was about.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Well, that
what
helped.
it means.
Now you reminded me what I was talking about. Thank you, Todd. He does such a great job. Okay. So So I talked to you a little bit about the looking glass technology. And so who here knows what that is? Anybody heard of that before? Okay. So the looking glass was received by a man that we refer to as the Master General when he was running Area 51. And that looking glass, so at the time, they weren't on our side.
Well, there wasn't any side,
There wasn't a
really.
side to be on, really. They were unaware of the people
You
that
just work for your country,
Yeah.
you know.
They were completely unaware of the shadow government that was pulling the strings. And so when they received this technology, they saw into the future, and they saw myself and Matthew and our partners and what we did in the future. And that's how they knew to find us and to keep tabs on us and to like, well, at first they viewed us as a threat, to be honest. Like they thought we were gonna like topple the government and then the world. And so they saw us as a threat, and so that's why there was so much surveillance going on. But over the years, when they were watching us and getting to know us as individuals and kind of inserted into our lives, they started to change their opinion of us, because they saw what we were doing and they realized that we were basically like moving mountains with nothing. And they couldn't understand how this group of, civilians without any, special training could do all of this. And so, yeah.
We're superheroes in disguise.
So, I mean, is there anything you want to add to the?
Looking glass, well, I also thought it was interesting that they have files on us. They know who we are in our past lives too, because when you're born, they take 2 vials. And any nurse will tell you this, that deals with the live birth. And basically, 1 vial goes off to someplace like, the Vatican ultimately, but before it goes there, it gets tested, and they determine, like we were talking about, I think we did on the show about how many strands of DNA there are actually. Different amounts, the highest being, well, I believe there are higher than 32 strands, quite frankly, but the silicon ones that they've discovered are 32, no, the crystalline are 32.
Yeah.
No, 36, sorry, crystalline 36 and
Silicon
32 and normal human
Carbon
26,
humans, yeah.
carbon-based human, 26 strands of DNA. So, they have files on all the people that are significant. And
All the people that are like 32 and
Above.
up, yeah.
But, it's so great now because the progress that's being made with eliminating the cabal, all this technology, all the truths about everything are going to be coming out. So we're real excited about that.
Yeah, and so the looking glass allowed them to see who we were going to be in the future, who our parents would be, and that's what, it's not like, it's not a full movie. It's not like you can watch all of time. So you get to see little snippets of everything, and then you kind of have to decode what those things mean. And so that's why you could be like kind of misinterpreted in the looking glass. But they knew who we were going to be, and in some of the cases they interfered in a negative way. So and like for instance, Obama is part of our galactic team up there, but down here he was intercepted at a young age and put onto a path to do what he did in this world. And so that's kind of like a heartbreaking thing for us up there, and for those of us down here who are part of his soul tribe who've seen like, but at the same time, there's some compassion there because we understand that it could have been any one of us. It happened to be him, and it happened to another woman that we worked with. In fact, she was the one that I was working with, that Matthew had introduced me to her, and I was working with her directly when we were doing the work with the GIA, and I talked about her during the show when we talked about when we did the Marduk takedown. So she was actually the one that did the heavy lifting that day. And she's has been in and out of our crew over the last like decade, But, they saw her in the looking glass. They made sure that her parents met, and then they made sure that they split up, and then her father was replaced by the head of the CIA. And they started, interfering with her, programming her, because she's one of the many individuals that's DNA coded to the financial system. And so she has some signatory capabilities, and they wanted to use her to move money for the Black Ops programs. And so because of that, it's been very difficult to work with her because she just, she's been messed with quite a bit. And so we have love and compassion for her, and we, would love for her to come home whenever she's ready. But she's been interfered with in a very serious way.
So I think it's also important to focus a little bit on the positive aspects of these gates. Like 522 was the Silver Gate, and that's something that was in my these numbers, right? Everybody has been seeing an increase, or you have your special number, or it's 1111. There's a variety of them. Well, that started for me when I was a teen, and I would see the number 1122. And so my whole life's work, in about 20 years ago, I wrote an 800-page book. It's called The Seventh Seal, Hidden Wisdom Unveiled. And, yes?
It's just funny because of
Hidden Wisdom Unveiled?
No, the 1122 thing. So,
Well, yeah, this is it. I mean, that's basically her birthday.
So when
and my birthday is the other gate.
Yeah.
And so this was these things that we pre-coded and left for ourselves as clues. And there's a lot of information, because not only do I have an 800-page book, I have 10 more years of PowerPoints. It's like 3,000 PowerPoint slides, and so I'm converting that into videos, and many of you probably watched. I'll have my next one done soon. But the importance of the knowledge of these gates, I think, is something to highlight, because it's happening. I don't know how many of you felt anything on 522, but yep. So these waves are waking us up more and more, and we're going to be intensifying up into the seventh. I call it the seventh seal, the 1122, the Golden Gate. I mean, there's a variety of names that I've called it, but my recent research I've found in Egypt, where all the symbolism for the Silver Gate and the Golden Gate and their correlated dates onto the calendar in Dendera. And so that's going to be a little bit more about what I'm releasing, preparing everybody in the knowledge that we are absolutely going into the golden age through this gate on November 22nd, up and coming.
Yeah.
And that golden age is also going to be infused with a great deal of gold, financial abundance.
Yeah.
So we all can do our passion and our purpose.
Yeah, so I was laughing because when I first met him and I found the book, so my birthday is actually 11/21, and it's a veil because it's 11/21/83, which is 121, which is, there's always hidden messages, right? And so I got this book, and now he spent like 20 years writing this, right? And I'm getting the book, and I'm flipping through it, and I'm like, what the heck, man? Like, this is my story. This guy is telling it, like, just like a man, to leave out the woman, and like, I'm like, he's getting the party started without me. Like, what the heck am I even doing here, And so when I first wrote to him, I was like, yeah, I read your book, like, I looked all over for him on the internet. It was really hard to find because he uses like a pen name, and so I finally found like a Google Plus page that had videos that he had posted recently. This is almost 4 years ago, and so I started leaving messages on the videos, and I was just like, my name is Megan, and this is my birthday, and we're connected, and we need to talk. And by the way, your numbers are off by 1. So So they have me like read more into the book, and he goes through this whole section about how things are off by one as a veil, and and there's like a deeper meaning in it, and then he gets into the portion where it's all about the divine feminine. I'm
The
like,
return of the goddess, absolutely.
so I had been a little bit more patient. I wouldn't have offered my notes so quickly. So yeah, I mean, it's been this crazy adventure, right? And we've done all these crazy things, and but it's all been for a reason, and I think that's why we're all here. You know, we're all here on this mission to help Earth transition into the golden age that has been promised and prophesized for so long. And it's so exciting to be at the beginning of that. And I talked a little bit about this on the last show, this experience that I had recently, where I was sitting in Pam's living room, actually, and I was asked a question by my friend, and like all of a sudden I just like got pulled back, and they were like 100 yards away, and it sounded like really echoey, and I couldn't see their faces clearly. And it was like the reality shifts that I had experienced before in the earlier timeline collapsings, but this one lasted for a really long time. And it took me a long time to kind of reacclimate to like the new timeline that we crossed through. And so about a week or so after that, we were talking to the Galactics, and they said that, you know, you made a transition. And over the next 6 months, you know, everybody is making that transition on their, like, in their own time before we approach the gate. And so I think a lot of you may have crossed over that threshold on the 522 gate, which was really intense. We had a gathering at the house and did an activation, and it was extremely powerful. We felt a lot of stuff shifting, and so.
And we're going to do more of those. Of course, we have an event planned for 7/28 at the Creative Life Center. And it's going to be a super activation along with a couple of our other friends doing some of their awakening work.
Yeah, we're really excited about that event, and you know, everything's moving forward behind the scenes. So just in a quick summary, this is what our group has done. Is that we've gathered the world's assets and made a clear path for them to make their way into multiple countries, to eliminate their debts and stimulate their economies, and to do humanitarian project funding. So that's what we've been working on behind the scenes. And we've been doing that for quite some time. Matthew had worked with a small team and created a new banking system many years ago that they successfully inserted and took over the old system. And this included some off-planet technology that was a firewall that kept the cabal out, and they successfully kept it for a few years before the cabal took it back over. And so we've been going in this back and forth with them. We've been working to eliminate them. And as we get farther and farther down the line, more of the patriots within the military and the agencies have, you know, come to our side to assist in that, and that's made it more possible. And then also when the 2016 election happened, the administration that took office made it even more possible for us to do that. And so we are in the final stages now of bringing money into the United States, which has been a huge hurdle. You know, we have moved multiple billions over the last few years, and it's been stolen every time by the banks. And so it took us a long time to figure out a very clever way to do this. And because I don't want it to be stopped, and I want everybody to be prosperous, I'm not going to tell you how. And so we're kind of in the final stages of that, and that's really exciting for us because the thing is that this has always been a spiritual revolution. This has nothing to do with the financial world. Money is made up. It's just a tool that allows us to conduct commerce and have a society, but it's not the center point of our reality. It's our spiritual existence and our spiritual experience on this planet. And something went wrong a long time ago that that changed that, and shackled people with made-up debt, and we want to eliminate that so that we can live the way that we're meant to live on this planet as sovereign beings and on a spiritual path. So now that we are moving away from, or finishing up with the financial aspect of this, this is the major focus now. And this is where all of you come in as well, because we are, essentially we're ascension pioneers. We've woken up, we've gone through our initiations, and now as the veils are lifted for the rest of the planet, we need to help them find their way, because their identities are being destroyed and their heroes are being knocked off of their pedestals. And so we need to help them find the truth and find the light, and reacquaint themselves with their spiritual existence.
Indeed.
So you want to say
It's
something?
exciting, yes.
I wanted to know if you could tell us what the looking glass looks like. And also, did you manifest the pyramid and the water and everything that you have in your...
We're still going to be building that. It's being provided with everything that's forthcoming now. As far as the looking glass, we've never seen it. We've only been told by, people that,
Saw us in it.
so our second in command talks directly with the Master General, and he's told him many details about it. So we've heard it from our partner, but we've never seen it ourselves.
Yeah, unfortunately. We pulled the short straw.
Hi, I was wondering, I just want to clarify, is it going to be this November 22nd?
Yes.
That things will be changing? And what did you say about living here in Sedona at that time?
Yeah, so, okay. So what the Galactics have shared with us about this is that the gate that we just passed through is a gate of financial abundance, and so crossing through that threshold is what allows the money to start flowing. Because this is not the focus is the spiritual ascension. The Golden Gate represents a spiritual ascension, and so this is something that is it's a beginning. It marks a beginning, but it's not we're still going through a transitional period. And so we have up until the second solar eclipse in 2024 to get the rest of humanity on board with the vision of the new world. And so what they've talked about as well is that this November, the 11/11, is a benchmark for the falling of the cabal, and they have said that we may see some very public changes, and so that's what we can expect to see. But time is cyclical, and it's going to take a long time for this transition to happen. So things are not going to change necessarily overnight, but if you're tuned into what's going on, you'll start to recognize the changes that are happening and recognize the progress that's being made. And but we don't want to do this too quickly, because it would cause a lot of chaos for the average humans. We got way more people on this planet than we intended, and so we have to do this in a kind of slow process.
As far as living here in Sedona, well, we love it, don't we? And it's going to be the first, golden city of light, so this spiritual Mecca is calling a lot of people here. And so we're going to be launching a lot of things here, a super healing center, broadcast network for the Good News Network, and, a few other things with the project funding administration. So.
Yeah. That's another thing that Bob has said when he told me about the Red Desert, was that this is the new Mecca, and that millions will come to make their pilgrimage.
Helen?
Yeah.
Sure.
gate portal, and how it's going to lead to abundance with the golden age.
Okay, well, first of all, the seal that I brought through in 1996, actually it looks like this sticker right here, without the numbers. So when it has all the numbers applied in the proper places with other information, when you sit on it, it actually activates, it opens up the base and clears out, each, as the energy goes up, clears out each chakra, removing all the blocks so that the energy can flow to the top of your head and open up your crown, which then enables you to go online more with your higher self and become more aligned with your divine purpose. And so it's very effective. People feel the energy, and then their life changes by working with it. And you can, order that on eBay off of, there's a link off of deepdisclosure.com. But what was the second part in terms of the Silvergate?
Yeah.
Well, so what happens is the alignment to the sun, the central sun, it actually, both of these locations, 522 and 1122, are on the Milky Way. Those signs, basically when the ecliptic of the sun hits the Milky Way, on each side of the zodiac, it's at 522 and 1122. And so that's when this alignment occurs to the central sun, that this energy comes stronger through. So I think that addresses that. Yes, but that's not his real name. In fact, we already referenced him once tonight. Mm-hmm.
Since the event on July 28th appears to be sold out,
It's not, though. I fixed that. I'm going to have to.
Somebody accidentally bought all the tickets.
Well, that was part, yeah. The first thing, I don't know how that
That is
happened.
like a really high bill.
Maybe they were going to panhandle them or something. But no, it's back correct that there are tickets for sale.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that
Stay
is
tuned.
everyone's question, isn't
Yeah,
it?
I know, everybody wants to. We
We're
want one
supposed
too.
to start assembling the first one in about a month's time. And we're going to have one here, of course, at the Healing Center. But we don't know what the rest of the plans are for selling them or whatever yet.
Where's the healing center?
We have a property in mind. It's,
We have a couple
We have a couple.
options, but yes, it'll be
Yeah.
built here in Sedona.
yeah, it'll be, yeah. We just, it's going to take us about probably a year to erect the temples.
Well, I don't know, I bend time pretty good.
Okay. Yeah. Put it there.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yes.
So is your website deepdisclosure.com?
Yeah.
And it will,
Under Contact Us, it leads to my book page, which is sevensealcodes.com. There you can find other things. So I recently got T-shirts too, and it's like, let me give you a hug and activate you, so that's kind of the latest rave. And they're purple, of course.
All right. Any other
I
questions?
could have brought some, but I wasn't planning on trying to merchandise
Yes.
here.
good guys in the cabal actually coming around to see the light.
The good guys in the cabal?
Some of them are switching, yeah.
Yeah.
It's true. Many have switched sides because it just doesn't make any sense. When the military's behind us and, all the agencies are behind us and the presidency's behind us and other countries are on board.
Some of them have,
So some of them are.
yeah. Some of them turned down our offer. They decided to double down on their evil.
Nobody likes change.
Yeah. Any other questions before we wrap it up? All right. Awesome.
Cool.
Well, thanks for listening. Thanks for
Yep,
coming out
thanks for
tonight.
having us. Yes.